A kingdom does not fall when its king is challenged. It falls when everyone believes they already know who is too weak to stand. The wedding bells had barely faded across the towering halls of Blackwood Castle when the massive oak doors burst open beneath the force of the icy mountain wind. Every noble, commander, and royal elder turned toward the entrance as 6 armored messengers stepped into the grand hall, their dark cloaks carrying the silver crest of the neighboring kingdom. The joyful music stopped. The laughter disappeared. Even the great crystal chandeliers seemed strangely still as silence settled over the celebration. At the center of the hall stood Alpha King Ethan Blackwood, tall and composed in his formal royal attire, his silver eyes reflecting the firelight dancing across polished marble floors. Beside him stood his new bride, Evelyn Carter, a young white-skinned Omega whose simple elegance looked almost out of place among the jeweled gowns and embroidered uniforms surrounding her. She wore no expensive crown, no extravagant jewelry, and no expression of pride. Her quiet smile remained gentle as she folded her hands before her, unaware that every noble in the room had spent the entire ceremony whispering about the human-born bride chosen to stand beside the most powerful Alpha King in the Northern Realm. Many believed the marriage had been arranged only to preserve peace. Others quietly questioned whether such a gentle woman could ever belong within a royal werewolf court. Ethan himself had never spoken those doubts aloud. Yet somewhere deep inside, he believed his greatest duty would always be protecting Evelyn from a world far harsher than the peaceful life she had known. Before another word could be spoken, the oldest messenger stepped forward and knelt respectfully. He raised a sealed scroll marked with black wax. A formal declaration from Alpha King Marcus Draven of the Eastern Dominion, he announced. Ethan accepted the scroll without changing expression, but the moment he broke the seal, the atmosphere inside the hall grew even heavier. The challenge was brief and unmistakable. 7 days from sunrise, the Eastern Dominion demanded a royal duel before the High Council. If Ethan refused, every neighboring kingdom would recognize his silence as surrender, and generations of carefully protected borders would become vulnerable without a single battle ever beginning. Murmurs swept through the crowded hall like cold wind through winter trees. Royal advisors exchanged uneasy glances while military commanders instinctively rested their hands upon ceremonial sword hilts. Several nobles quietly blamed the timing on the wedding itself, whispering that misfortune had entered the kingdom the moment a human bride crossed the palace gates. Evelyn heard every word, yet her calm expression never changed. Instead, she simply looked toward Ethan, whose attention remained fixed upon the challenge. She noticed the weight settling across his shoulders long before anyone else did. Without hesitation, she quietly stepped closer and gently touched his sleeve, offering nothing more than silent reassurance. Ethan looked down at her with a grateful smile that carried equal measures of affection and concern. In that single moment, he made a promise only to himself. No matter what happened during the coming duel, he would never allow danger to reach the woman standing beside him. Across the hall, however, an elderly palace steward watched Evelyn with unusual attention. As she instinctively adjusted the ceremonial sword hanging untouched beside the royal throne, her hand settled upon its hilt with flawless precision for only a heartbeat before she stepped away again. The old steward's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. No ordinary woman held a royal blade that way. He lowered his gaze without saying a word. While beyond the palace walls the first snow of the season began falling across the kingdom, carrying with it the quiet certainty that the greatest surprise awaiting the Northern Realm had not arrived with the rival king's challenge, but had already walked through the palace doors dressed as a bride. Morning sunlight spilled through the towering windows of Blackwood Castle, painting long ribbons of gold across polished stone floors as preparations for the royal duel quietly transformed the palace into a fortress of constant activity. Servants hurried through endless corridors carrying maps, armor, and sealed letters while commanders gathered inside the council chamber to discuss every possible strategy for the challenge waiting only days away. Alpha King Ethan Blackwood remained at the center of every conversation, calmly listening to his generals while weighing each suggestion with thoughtful patience. Although his expression never betrayed uncertainty, the burden resting upon his shoulders had grown heavier since the wedding feast ended. Losing the duel would mean risking generations of peace. Winning it would demand everything his kingdom expected from its king. Throughout the palace, however, another conversation quietly spread among the nobles. Few discussed military plans. Most preferred whispering about Evelyn Carter. They watched the young white-skinned Omega move gracefully through the castle gardens, speaking kindly with servants, helping elderly attendants carry baskets of winter flowers, and learning the names of every palace worker she met. To many of the aristocrats, her gentle nature only confirmed what they already believed. She looked too delicate for royal life, too compassionate for a kingdom built upon strength. Their quiet laughter often followed her through the marble halls, though never loudly enough for Ethan to hear. Evelyn noticed every glance and every whispered remark, yet she answered each one with the same calm smile. She neither defended herself nor tried to change anyone's opinion. That afternoon, Ethan found her arranging fresh, evergreen branches inside the royal library overlooking the snow-covered mountains. He smiled warmly before placing another log upon the fireplace. "The palace can be overwhelming," he admitted. "You do not have to attend every council meeting or ceremony. Rest while you can. I will handle everything else." Evelyn looked toward him with gentle appreciation. "You always speak as though I need protecting." Ethan chuckled softly. "Because I promised myself I would protect you." She lowered her eyes for a brief moment before answering. "Sometimes protecting someone also means trusting them." Ethan considered her words, though he simply smiled without fully understanding what she meant. Before either of them could continue, the elderly palace steward entered quietly, carrying several ancient inventory records recovered from a forgotten storage tower. As he carefully arranged the worn documents across a nearby table, one faded illustration slipped from between the pages. It showed an ancient royal guardian standing beside the first Alpha King, holding a ceremonial sword with a remarkably distinctive grip. The steward froze. Slowly he looked toward Evelyn, who had absent-mindedly reached for a decorative practice sword displayed above the fireplace, while clearing dust from the mantel. Without realizing anyone watched her, she adjusted the weapon with exactly the same flawless hand position shown in the centuries-old illustration. The movement lasted no longer than a heartbeat before she gently returned the sword to its place. Ethan noticed nothing unusual and continued discussing travel plans for the upcoming ceremony. The steward, however, felt his pulse quicken. That technique had disappeared from the kingdom decades before the current generation was even born. No ordinary bride could have learned it by accident. He quietly rolled the ancient illustration closed before anyone else noticed the resemblance, choosing silence over questions until he understood what fate had quietly brought into Blackwood Castle. Outside, snow continued falling over the royal towers while somewhere beyond the distant mountains, another king patiently prepared for a duel that neither side yet understood would change far more than the future of two kingdoms. 2 days passed with surprising calm, yet beneath the peaceful rhythm of palace life, an invisible current of unease continued flowing through every corridor of Blackwood Castle. The royal duel drew closer with every sunrise, and while soldiers strengthened the outer walls and royal messengers rode endlessly between neighboring kingdoms, Evelyn Carter quietly settled into the life of a queen no one quite understood. She spent her mornings helping the castle healers organize herbs gathered from the winter forests and her afternoons visiting elderly servants whose families had served the crown for generations. She listened more than she spoke, remembered every name she heard, and thanked every person who crossed her path. Many of the palace staff soon admired her kindness, but among the nobles the whispers continued. They saw only a graceful white-skinned Omega who smiled too easily and walked too softly to belong beside the Alpha King. Ethan Blackwood noticed the growing tension, though not its true cause. Believing the approaching duel placed enough worry upon his bride already, he gently encouraged her to avoid the military training grounds where commanders practiced every day. "The arena is no place for you," he said one crisp winter afternoon as they crossed the upper courtyard overlooking snow-covered mountains. The sound of steel and endless strategy meetings would only bring unnecessary stress. Evelyn answered with her familiar gentle smile. "Perhaps, or perhaps there is something worth learning wherever people prepare to protect what they love." Ethan smiled warmly, interpreting her words as quiet encouragement rather than hidden confidence. He reached for her hand before returning to the council chamber, never noticing that her eyes briefly followed the training field below. After he disappeared inside the palace, Evelyn continued walking alone until she reached an old storage tower rarely visited by anyone except the castle steward. Snow had collected across the narrow stone steps leading upward, and the wooden door creaked softly as she stepped inside. Dust covered forgotten shields, faded banners, and weapon racks left untouched for decades. Among them rested an ancient ceremonial sword displayed upon a weathered oak stand. Something about it immediately drew her attention. She approached without hesitation and gently lifted the blade. It felt perfectly balanced in her hands, as though it had been waiting for her touch. Without conscious thought, she adjusted her stance and instinctively held the sword with calm precision before making one smooth practice movement through the silent air. The motion was graceful, controlled, and effortless, ending with the blade resting exactly where it had begun. Behind the half-open doorway, the elderly palace steward watched in complete astonishment. He had entered only to inventory forgotten relics, yet the technique unfolding before him belonged to a discipline he had not witnessed since his youth. Decades earlier, the last commander of the Royal Guardians had demonstrated that exact sequence before disappearing from public life. Not even the finest instructors of the current generation still practiced it. Before the steward could gather the courage to speak, Evelyn quietly returned the sword to its stand, brushed a thin layer of dust from the hilt, and continued exploring the room as though nothing unusual had happened. She never realized anyone had been watching. The old steward remained hidden in silence, his thoughts racing faster than ever before. For the first time, he no longer wondered whether the young queen carried a secret. Instead, he began asking a far more unsettling question. Who had taught the seemingly gentle bride a forgotten art that even the greatest warriors believed had vanished from the kingdom many years ago? The morning of the royal duel arrived beneath a pale winter sky that covered the capital in fresh snow, turning every rooftop and castle tower into a sea of white that reflected the first light of dawn. Before sunrise, thousands of citizens had already gathered outside the royal arena, their quiet conversations filling the cold air as banners from every allied kingdom fluttered above the stone walls. Nobles arrived in elegant carriages while commanders in polished ceremonial armor took their assigned places around the circular arena where generations of rulers had defended their honor through skill rather than conquest. Inside the palace, Alpha King Ethan Blackwood stood before the ancient crest of his family as attendants secured the final pieces of his formal armor. His expression remained calm, yet the weight of responsibility rested heavily in his silver eyes. Every decision he made today would shape the future of his people. A trusted royal physician entered carrying a steaming cup prepared from rare mountain herbs, explaining that it would help maintain energy through the long ceremony before the duel. Ethan accepted the drink with quiet gratitude, unaware that someone had secretly altered its ingredients during the confusion of the previous evening. The change was subtle enough to escape every inspection, leaving neither strange taste nor suspicious scent. Moments later, Ethan joined the royal procession leading toward the arena beside Evelyn Carter. She noticed almost immediately that something felt different. His breathing had become slightly heavier during the short walk, and the confidence that normally surrounded him now seemed burdened by unusual fatigue. When she softly asked whether he felt well, Ethan offered a reassuring smile. "It is only the weight of the day," he replied. "Do not worry about me." Evelyn nodded politely, though concern quietly settled within her heart. Across the arena, the arrival of Alpha King Marcus Draven was announced by the sound of ceremonial horns echoing across the stone walls. The rival ruler entered with measured confidence, surrounded by disciplined warriors who stopped several feet behind him as tradition required. The High Council welcomed both kings before inviting them toward the center platform where the formal challenge would begin. Ethan rose from his seat, but as he took his first few steps, an unexpected wave of weakness passed through him. His balance shifted only slightly, yet Evelyn noticed it instantly. So did the elderly palace steward watching from behind the council members. Ethan steadied himself before anyone else could react, determined not to reveal even the smallest sign of difficulty before the gathered kingdoms. Still, the steward's expression darkened with concern. Whatever troubled the Alpha King was not ordinary exhaustion. The council continued its formal announcements while murmurs slowly spread through the audience. Some believed Ethan simply carried the burden of leadership. Others quietly wondered whether the approaching duel had placed unusual pressure upon him. Evelyn remained completely still beside the royal throne, observing every movement with careful attention. She watched Ethan straighten his shoulders despite the growing strain, refusing to allow uncertainty to reach his people. In that silent moment, she understood something no one else seemed willing to see. The challenge facing the kingdom was no longer only the rival king standing across the arena. A hidden threat had already entered the palace long before sunrise. As the High Council prepared to signal the official beginning of the duel, Evelyn gently closed her eyes for a single heartbeat, her calm expression unchanged while an unshakable decision quietly formed within her. Before the day reached its end, she knew she could no longer remain only the gentle bride everyone believed they understood. Evelyn Carter remained perfectly still as the High Council completed the final ceremonial announcements. Yet every instinct she possessed warned her that something had gone terribly wrong. Alpha King Ethan Blackwood continued standing before the gathered kingdoms with unwavering dignity, but the subtle strain behind his steady posture had become impossible for her to ignore. His breathing was slower than usual, and the confident energy she had quietly admired since arriving at Blackwood Castle seemed to fade with every passing minute. Around them, the nobles noticed nothing. They remained focused upon the traditions of the royal duel, exchanging polite smiles and confident predictions that their Alpha King would once again defend the honor of the Northern Realm. Only the elderly palace steward watched Ethan with growing concern, his experienced eyes recognizing that this was not simple fatigue. Before the High Council could formally invite both rulers into the arena, Ethan took another measured step forward. For the briefest instant, his balance shifted again. He recovered so smoothly that most people believed he had merely adjusted his footing on the polished stone, but Evelyn understood the truth. If the duel began now, he would not face his rival at his full strength. Her heart remained calm even as the weight of that realization settled upon her. She slowly stepped away from the royal seating area, her movement so graceful that it drew little attention until she reached the center of the ceremonial platform. Conversations immediately faded into silence. Hundreds of eyes turned toward the young queen whose quiet presence had rarely interrupted any royal proceeding. Ethan looked at her with gentle confusion. "Evelyn," he said softly, "return to your seat." She met his gaze with the same peaceful expression she had carried since the day they first met. "Your Majesty," she answered respectfully, "please allow me to stand in your place today." A wave of astonished whispers swept across the arena. Several nobles laughed openly, believing they had misunderstood her words. One council member lowered his head as though embarrassed by the unexpected request. Across the arena, Alpha King Marcus Draven allowed a faint smile to appear, clearly convinced that fear had already weakened the Northern Realm before the duel had even begun. Ethan stepped closer, careful to keep his voice gentle. "This is not your burden to carry," he said. "I promised I would protect you." Evelyn looked at him with quiet warmth before replying. "And I promised myself that I would never stand by while someone I care about carries a burden alone." Ethan searched her face, hoping to find hesitation or uncertainty, yet he found neither. There was only calm conviction. The elderly palace steward slowly closed his eyes as understanding finally settled within him. The forgotten sword technique, the quiet confidence, the mysterious past that refused to reveal itself piece by piece now led to this single moment. He knew the young queen was not acting from impulse. She had made this decision long before anyone else realized it would become necessary. Evelyn turned toward the High Council and bowed respectfully. "I ask permission to represent the Northern Realm according to the ancient law allowing a royal champion to answer a formal challenge when extraordinary circumstances threaten the crown." The council members exchanged startled glances. Few people even remembered such an ancient tradition still existed. Snow drifted gently beyond the towering walls of the arena as complete silence settled over every spectator. No one could predict what would happen next, but for the first time since the challenge had arrived, the future of the kingdom no longer rested upon assumptions. It rested upon a woman whom almost everyone had underestimated. The High Council remained silent for what felt like an eternity before its eldest member slowly rose from his carved stone seat. His weathered eyes moved from Evelyn Carter to Alpha King Ethan Blackwood, and finally toward the ancient book of royal law resting upon a silver pedestal beside the council platform. One by one, the yellowed pages were carefully turned until the old counselor stopped at a passage almost forgotten by history. His voice echoed clearly across the arena. When extraordinary circumstances threaten the reigning crown, a royal champion chosen by honor may answer a formal challenge with the approval of the council. A wave of astonishment swept through the thousands gathered inside the arena. Many had heard stories of the ancient law as children, but few believed it had ever truly existed. Ethan immediately stepped forward. "I cannot allow this," he said firmly, though kindness remained in every word. "This challenge belongs to me." Evelyn faced him without raising her voice. "The challenge belongs to the kingdom, and today the kingdom needs its king to remain standing." Ethan searched her eyes, hoping to find uncertainty, but instead he found quiet confidence unlike anything he had seen before. It was neither reckless nor proud. It was the calm certainty of someone who had already accepted every consequence of the choice before her. Across the arena, Alpha King Marcus Draven watched the exchange with open amusement. He folded his arms and smiled politely. "If this is truly the Northern Realm's answer, I will respect your traditions," he said. "I simply did not expect your greatest defender to arrive wearing a wedding gown only days ago." Laughter rose from sections of the audience before quickly fading as Evelyn calmly stepped toward the ceremonial weapon stand positioned at the center of the arena. Several finely crafted practice swords rested there, prepared according to royal custom. Without hesitation or hesitation born from fear, she selected a single blade and held it with effortless balance. The movement was so natural that the elderly palace steward quietly lowered his head. It was the same forgotten discipline he had witnessed inside the storage tower, now displayed before every kingdom. The steward glanced toward the council members, wondering whether anyone else recognized what they were seeing. Most did not. They saw only graceful posture. He saw years of invisible training hidden beneath remarkable humility. Evelyn took her place inside the marked circle of the arena while snowflakes drifted gently into the open roof above, disappearing as they touched the polished stone. She neither boasted nor attempted to intimidate her opponent. Instead, she offered a respectful bow exactly as ancient tradition required. Even Marcus paused for a brief moment, surprised by the precision of her formal greeting. The signal announcing the beginning of the royal contest echoed across the arena. Marcus advanced confidently, expecting hesitation from the quiet young queen. Instead, Evelyn moved with measured patience, calmly avoiding unnecessary risk while reading every movement before responding with remarkable control. She never rushed. She never allowed emotion to dictate her decisions. Every step seemed purposeful, every motion economical, every choice guided by discipline rather than force. The crowd gradually fell silent as confusion replaced amusement. This was not luck. This was not courage born from desperation. Something far deeper revealed itself with every passing moment. Ethan watched from the royal platform, forgetting his own exhaustion as disbelief slowly gave way to realization. The woman he believed he needed to protect had stepped into the arena without fear, carrying herself with a confidence that could not have been learned in only a few days or even a few years. Somewhere within the quiet rhythm of her movements rested a lifetime of discipline that she had never spoken about. And for the first time since meeting Evelyn Carter, the Alpha King understood that the greatest mystery inside his kingdom had never been the rival rulers standing across the arena. It had been the extraordinary woman standing beside him all along. The silence surrounding the arena became heavier with every passing moment as the contest continued, not because of loud displays of strength, but because every expectation carried into the royal duel was quietly falling apart. Alpha King Marcus Draven had entered with complete confidence, believing experience alone would secure an easy victory against the young queen standing before him. Yet each careful movement Evelyn Carter made forced him to rethink every assumption. She never wasted energy. She never reacted with panic. Every measured step placed her exactly where she needed to be, turning patience into her greatest advantage. The audience leaned forward in growing disbelief. The laughter that had greeted her only minutes earlier had disappeared completely, replaced by stunned silence broken only by the winter wind sweeping through the open walls of the arena. High above the arena, the royal banners fluttered beneath gray clouds while members of the High Council exchanged increasingly uncertain glances. Several veteran commanders quietly recognized principles of movement they had studied only in ancient military records but had never witnessed with their own eyes. The elderly palace steward lowered his head, no longer surprised by what he was seeing. Instead, he felt relief. The secret carried for so many years had finally begun revealing itself naturally. Ethan Blackwood watched without speaking. Every graceful movement Evelyn made answered questions he had never thought to ask. The confidence she displayed had not appeared overnight. It had been shaped through discipline, restraint, and years of quiet preparation hidden beneath extraordinary humility. For the first time since their marriage, he realized how often he had mistaken kindness for weakness. Across the arena, Marcus adjusted his approach, abandoning casual confidence in favor of complete concentration. He understood now that he was no longer facing someone protected by royal privilege. He was facing someone whose composure had been earned long before entering the palace. The contest continued under strict royal rules until a decisive sequence unfolded with remarkable speed and flawless control. Evelyn anticipated her opponent's final commitment, calmly, redirected the momentum without unnecessary force, and guided the exchange to a clean conclusion recognized immediately by every official overseeing the duel. The ceremonial judges rose to their feet almost simultaneously. Before anyone else could react, the eldest council member lifted the royal staff and declared the result according to ancient law. The Northern Realm had successfully answered the challenge. A wave of astonishment swept across the arena. Thousands of spectators remained frozen for several heartbeats before applause slowly began spreading from one section to another until the entire arena echoed with admiration. Even visiting nobles from distant kingdoms stood in respectful acknowledgement of what they had witnessed. Marcus Draven accepted the council's decision with visible disappointment, but also with dignity. He stepped forward, bowed respectfully to Evelyn, and said, "Today I misjudged both your kingdom and its queen." Evelyn returned the bow with equal respect. "Honor grows stronger when it is shared," she replied calmly. There was no triumph in her voice, only quiet grace. Ethan finally walked toward her, his earlier weakness forgotten beneath overwhelming emotion. He looked into her eyes, searching for the gentle bride he thought he knew, only to discover that the same compassion had always existed alongside remarkable strength. Nothing about Evelyn had changed. Only his understanding of her had. As snow continued falling beyond the arena walls, the people of the Northern Realm realized they had not simply witnessed an unexpected victory. They had witnessed the beginning of a truth that had remained hidden in plain sight, and every question about the mysterious young queen was only just beginning to find its answer. The celebration inside the royal arena continued long after the council announced the official result. Yet Evelyn Carter quietly stepped away from the center of attention as though nothing extraordinary had happened. While nobles congratulated one another and royal musicians filled the winter air with triumphant melodies, she simply returned the ceremonial sword to its stand with the same care she had shown when picking it up. There was no pride in her expression and no desire to enjoy the admiration now surrounding her. She had done only what she believed the kingdom needed. That simple humility left an even deeper impression upon those who had witnessed the duel than the contest itself. Alpha King Ethan Blackwood slowly approached her, no longer seeing only the gentle bride he had promised to protect. He now saw someone whose quiet strength had existed from the very beginning while he had failed to recognize it. Before the gathered kingdoms, Ethan lowered his head in sincere respect. A hush settled across the arena as every noble watched their king address his queen. "Evelyn," he said with complete honesty, "I believed I understood your heart, but I never understood your journey. I thought I was protecting someone fragile when, in truth, I was standing beside someone remarkable." Evelyn smiled gently, her kindness unchanged despite everything that had happened. "You were protecting me," she answered softly. "Kindness is never a mistake. Sometimes it only needs understanding to become complete." Her words spread through the silent arena with surprising power. They carried no resentment and offered no accusation. Instead, they revealed the quiet wisdom that had guided every choice she had made since entering Blackwood Castle. At that moment, the elderly palace steward stepped forward and respectfully requested permission to address the High Council. After receiving approval, he revealed the truth he had carried in silence for many years. Decades earlier, the last commander of the Royal Guardians had secretly accepted a single student after foreseeing a future in which the kingdom would one day need a protector who valued compassion as much as strength. That student had been Evelyn. She had never been raised to seek glory or recognition. She had been taught to remain unnoticed until duty called upon her. The forgotten sword discipline, the calm confidence, and the extraordinary restraint displayed throughout the duel were all part of a legacy preserved in silence across an entire generation. Shock spread through the audience once again, but this time it was followed by profound respect. The nobles who had once whispered about the human-born queen now lowered their heads with genuine humility. Even visiting rulers acknowledged that true greatness often arrived without demanding attention. Ethan looked toward the steward before turning back to Evelyn. Countless memories suddenly gained new meaning. Every quiet observation she had made, every peaceful response to insult, every graceful movement he had overlooked now formed a story he had never known existed. He reached for her hand, not to lead her away from danger, but to stand beside her as an equal before the entire kingdom. As the afternoon sun broke through the winter clouds, warm light spilled across the arena, illuminating the royal banners above. The people cheered not because they had discovered the strongest warrior in the realm, but because they had discovered something far rarer. They had found a queen whose greatest strength had never been hidden inside remarkable skill alone. It had always lived within the quiet courage to serve others without asking the world to notice until the moment that service became necessary. In the weeks that followed, winter slowly surrendered to the first signs of spring, and with every passing day the northern realm seemed transformed in ways no royal decree could have accomplished alone. The story of the quiet queen spread far beyond the castle walls, traveling across distant kingdoms through merchants, travelers, and royal envoys. Yet whenever people praised Evelyn Carter for what she had done inside the royal arena, she gently redirected every compliment toward those who had stood beside her. She thanked the palace servants who had welcomed her with kindness, the healers who cared for every injured soldier without asking for recognition, and the loyal citizens who continued believing in their kingdom even during uncertain days. Her humility inspired others more deeply than any celebration ever could. Alpha King Ethan Blackwood changed as well. He no longer measured strength only by what could be seen in moments of conflict. Instead, he began inviting every member of his council to speak openly, listening with greater patience before making decisions. He often asked Evelyn for her perspective, discovering that her wisdom reached far beyond the discipline she had quietly mastered. Together, they visited villages throughout the kingdom, speaking with farmers, craftsmen, teachers, and families who had rarely expected to meet their rulers. The distance between the crown and the people slowly disappeared, replaced by trust built through genuine compassion. The elderly palace steward finally retired after decades of faithful service, knowing the legacy entrusted to him had reached the person destined to carry it forward. Before leaving the castle, he presented Evelyn with a small wooden box containing the emblem of the Royal Guardians. It was not offered as a reward, but as a reminder. A true guardian, he said with a gentle smile, is remembered not because others feared their strength, but because others felt safe in their presence. Evelyn accepted the gift with gratitude, understanding that the greatest honor was not preserving an ancient tradition, but living its purpose every single day. Months later, representatives from neighboring kingdoms gathered once again inside Blackwood Castle, not for another challenge, but to renew alliances strengthened by mutual respect. Among the visitors stood Alpha King Marcus Draven, who greeted Ethan and Evelyn with sincere courtesy. He admitted that the events of the royal duel had changed not only his opinion of the Northern Realm, but also the way he intended to lead his own people. Old rivalries gradually gave way to cooperation, proving that lasting peace was built through understanding rather than pride. As the evening sun cast warm golden light across the castle gardens, Ethan and Evelyn stood together overlooking the valley, where children laughed freely beneath blooming trees. Ethan smiled quietly before turning toward his queen. "I once believed my greatest responsibility was protecting you," he said. Evelyn gently squeezed his hand. "And now?" she asked. He looked across the peaceful kingdom before answering. "Now I understand that the greatest rulers protect hope together." Evelyn's smile reflected the same quiet grace that had never changed from the day she first entered the palace. She had never sought admiration, power, or recognition. She had simply chosen courage when kindness required it most. Long after the banners of that unforgettable day had been lowered and the cheers had faded into history, the people remembered one truth above all others. The strongest crown was never carried by the loudest voice or the mightiest warrior. It rested upon those who possessed the humility to serve, the wisdom to listen, and the courage to stand for others when it mattered most. And that legacy endured for generations, reminding every child born beneath the mountains of the northern realm that true greatness is revealed not by the desire to be seen, but by the willingness to quietly become the light others need.